Picture a girl, 16 years old, not a queen, not a warrior, not important enough for history to remember her name. She comes from a small coastal town somewhere in Europe. Maybe Italy, maybe Greece, maybe a place erased by wars and changing borders long ago. It does not matter, because the world she knew ended the moment the ship reached Istanbul. The sea behind her is gray. The city ahead of her is gold. And between those two worlds stands a gate so enormous it barely looks made for human beings. The wood is dark and thick. Iron bands cross over it like chains wrapped around a coffin. Soldiers move beside it without speaking. Their boots scrape against stone polished smooth by generations of fear. The girl stares upward. The gates rise higher and higher until they disappear into shadow. For one terrible second, she understands something. These doors are not designed to keep enemies out. They are designed to keep people in. A hand grips her shoulder. Hard. Move. She does. Because there is nowhere else to go. Behind her, the men who captured her are already walking away. Their work is finished. Their payment already counted. To them, she is no longer a person, just cargo delivered successfully. The gates open slowly, not dramatically, not loudly. That is what makes it worse. No screaming hinges, no shouting guards, no visible violence, only silence, cold, organized silence. And then she steps inside. The gates close behind her. Forever. You have probably heard stories about the Ottoman Harem before. Almost everyone has. Beautiful women stretched across silk cushions. Soft music drifting through marble halls. Golden lamp. Sweet perfume. Powerful sultans surrounded by endless luxury. Paintings showed it that way for centuries. European artists became obsessed with the fantasy of it. Exotic women. Hidden pleasure rooms, endless desire. There was only one problem. Most of the people painting those pictures had never entered the harem. They never saw it. They imagined it. And imagination is very good at turning prisons into fantasies. The real harem was not built for pleasure. It was built for control. Perfect control. Every movement organized. Every word monitored. Every girl transformed into something useful for the empire. The Ottomans had a system for this, a terrifyingly efficient system, because when new girls arrived at the palace, the empire did not see human beings. It saw raw material. The process began immediately. First came the bath, not kindness, preparation. The girls were washed, examined, inspected. Older women walked around them silently, studying faces, skin, posture, teeth, hair. Looking for flaws. Looking for value. No one explained anything. No one needed to. Fear explained enough. Then came the first real theft. Their names. A senior servant stood before each girl and assigned a new one. Ottoman names. Palace names. Names chosen to sound useful, soft, obedient. The old names disappeared instantly. The names their mothers once whispered. Gone. The names shouted by childhood friends across narrow streets near the sea. Gone. The names spoken during prayers. Gone. You could arrive as Maria. You became something else before sunset. And after the name came the language. The girls were forbidden from speaking their native tongues inside the palace walls. No Greek, no Italian, no Slavic dialects whispered at night. Only Ottoman Turkish. If you did not learn it quickly, life became dangerous, because language inside the palace was not simply communication. It was survival. A wrong word could offend someone above you. A misunderstood order could earn punishment. A private conversation in your native language could create suspicion. and suspicion inside the harem was deadly. So the girls learned, slowly, painfully. Their old thoughts became trapped inside languages nobody around them understood anymore. Think about that. Think about forgetting how to express grief. Think about wanting to cry for your mother, but no longer having the right words to describe her face. That was the beginning, not the end. The new girls were called asami, novices, at the very bottom of the hierarchy. Their lives became routine. Wake before sunrise, wash, serve, clean, study, wait, always wait. They learned palace etiquette with terrifying precision. How to walk, how to kneel, how to lower their eyes correctly, how to pour coffee without trembling, how to remain silent for hours. Especially that. Silence was one of the first lessons, and one of the last. The palace itself was beautiful. That mattered, because horror hidden inside beauty becomes harder to recognize. Blue tiles covered the walls in patterns so detailed they looked unreal. Marble fountains filled the courtyards with soft water sounds. Sunlight entered through carved screens and painted the floors gold. There were gardens. There were silk curtains. There were rooms scented with rosewater. Some days the girls almost forgot they were prisoners. That was part of the design. A prison becomes more effective when it does not always feel like one. But the truth always returned, usually at night, when the halls became quiet, when the younger girls cried into pillows so nobody would hear them, when someone whispered in a language she was not supposed to remember, when another girl suddenly disappeared from the sleeping chambers and nobody dared ask why. Because questions were dangerous, and answers were worse. Most of the girls would never leave those walls. Not dramatically, not violently. They would simply fade there, year after year, waiting, serving, growing older, watching newer girls arrive while their own reflections slowly changed. Many died inside the palace completely forgotten. No stories, no graves anyone visited. No records history cared enough to keep. Just silence. And for most of them, that was the entire story. But for a few, a very small few, the danger had not even begun yet. Because sometimes the Sultan noticed a girl. And inside the harem, being noticed was not salvation. It was the beginning of something far more terrifying. Stay with us till the end for valuable insight. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. Inside the harem, fear moved quietly. Not like war. Not like battle. There were no charging armies here. No burning cities. No screaming crowds. Everything happened softly. That was what made it unbearable. The girls learned this quickly. Especially the new ones. Especially the asami. At first, they believed survival meant becoming invisible. Do your work. Speak little. Avoid attention. Some even prayed for it. Please do not let him notice me. Please. But the harem had its own cruel logic. Because one morning, without warning, a servant might stop beside your bed and speak a single sentence. The Sultan has summoned you. And suddenly your life no longer belonged to you at all. The chosen girls were prepared carefully, bathed again, hair brushed until it shined, perfume pressed lightly onto their skin, jewelry placed around wrists that still trembled from fear. Older women instructed them in whispers, how to enter the chamber, how low to bow, when to speak, when not to. Most important of all, how to hide terror. The palace demanded beauty, but it demanded composure even more. Imagine being 16 years old. Imagine being taken from your home only months earlier. Imagine standing outside a chamber guarded by silent eunuchs while everyone around you behaves as though this is the greatest honor imaginable. And imagine understanding that refusing is impossible. The doors open, you walk inside, and your future changes forever. People later romanticize these moments. Painters imagined passion. Poets imagined seduction. They misunderstood completely, because inside the harem, intimacy was never simple. It was political. Every glance mattered. Every conversation mattered. Every night mattered. The Sultan was not merely a man. He was the center of an empire, and proximity to him could raise someone from obscurity into terrifying levels of influence, or destroy her completely. The girls understood this faster than outsiders ever did, especially the older concubines, especially the women who had survived long enough to learn how power truly worked inside those walls. Because the harem was not peaceful. It only looked peaceful from far away. In reality, it was a battlefield without visible weapons. The girls watched one another constantly. Who was summoned last night? Who returned smiling? Who suddenly received better clothing? Who had been crying alone near the baths? Every detail mattered. Rumors moved through the palace like smoke. Silent, fast, impossible to fully contain. A servant overhears something in a corridor. A senior concubine notices someone leaving the Sultan's chambers later than usual. A glance during dinner lasts 1 second too long. By morning, everybody knows, or thinks they know. Truth became dangerous inside the harem because truth rarely stayed pure for long. It changed shape as it traveled, and sometimes rumors killed faster than poison. The eunuchs helped maintain this system. They were everywhere, at the doors, in the corridors, near the private gardens, outside sleeping chambers, always watching. The girls could never fully relax because somebody was always listening. Letters were monitored, conversations remembered, movements tracked. You could not simply walk where you wished. Even loneliness became difficult to find. The chief eunuch held enormous power inside the palace, more than many military commanders outside its walls. He controlled access to information, access to important women, access to the Sultan himself. A single favor from him could improve your position overnight. His disapproval could bury you quietly for years. So everybody smiled carefully. Everybody calculated constantly. And beneath all the silk and marble, paranoia grew. One girl stopped eating. Another suddenly became ill. Another disappeared from favor without explanation. Nobody trusted coincidence anymore. How could they? The palace rewarded suspicion. A careless girl did not survive long. The most dangerous thing inside the harem was not hatred. It was uncertainty. You never knew who was sincere. A friend today might become useful information tomorrow. A woman comforting you at night might repeat your fears to someone more powerful before sunrise. Trust became almost impossible, and yet the girls still needed alliances. That was the trap. Human beings are not designed to survive isolation forever, so bonds formed anyway. Older concubines sometimes protected younger girls, but protection always carried a price. Loyalty, obedience, information. Nothing inside the palace was free. Nothing. And over all of this stood one woman, the veiled Sultan, the Sultan's mother, the true center of power inside the harem. Outsiders often imagined the concubines competing only for the Sultan's affection. They missed the deeper reality. The Sultan ruled the empire, but his mother often ruled the palace around him. Her approval mattered enormously. A kind word from her could transform a girl's future. Her displeasure could erase it. The women knew this, every single one of them, so they studied her moods carefully. What pleased her? What offended her? Which girls she favored? Which ones she ignored? Entire lives changed based on these observations, and through it all, the palace remained beautiful. That beauty mattered more than people realized, because terror hidden beneath luxury creates confusion in the human mind. The fountains still flowed peacefully while girls whispered in fear nearby. Birds still sang in the gardens while rivalries quietly destroyed lives. Sunlight still touched the marble floors while someone somewhere inside the palace realized she had lost favor forever. The contrast made everything feel unreal, like living inside a dream designed by somebody cruel. And for most women, there was no escape waiting at the end. No rescue. No dramatic return home. Only time. Years passing slowly inside locked walls. Some women spent decades there, their youth disappearing quietly, their memories of the outside world becoming weaker and weaker until even their own childhoods felt like stories that happened to someone else. History barely remembers them now. That may be the saddest part. Hundreds of women lived and died inside those chambers. Most left behind nothing. No portraits, no letters, no names carved into stone. Only silence. But for the women chosen by the Sultan, silence did not last, because attention inside the harem came with a terrible possibility. A possibility that transformed ordinary fear into something much darker. A child. A son. And once that happened, the real nightmare began. Inside the harem, a woman could survive many things. Loneliness, surveillance, humiliation, even fear. But there was one thing far more dangerous than all of them combined. Motherhood, especially if the child was a boy. From the outside, having the Sultan's son looked like victory. The women outside the palace imagined luxury after that. Security, protection, importance. They imagined a mother holding her child while servants bowed around her. They imagined safety. The Ottoman Empire imagined something very different. It imagined succession. And succession meant danger. Because empires fear uncertainty more than cruelty. Always. A weak harvest could be survived. A rebellion could be crushed. Even plague eventually passed. But civil war could tear an empire apart forever. The Ottomans understood this very well. They had watched kingdoms destroy themselves through battles between rival princes. Brothers murdering brothers. Armies splitting apart. Cities burned because powerful men wanted the same throne. So the empire created a solution. Cold, efficient, monstrous. When a new sultan took power, his brothers could legally be executed. All of them. Not accused. Not tried. Simply removed. Because dead princes could not start wars. The law sounded rational to administrators. That was the terrifying part. The system did not see children. It saw future threats, and inside the harem, every mother understood exactly what this meant. The moment your son was born, he became both precious and doomed. Because if he one day lost the struggle for succession, he would die. Not metaphorically, not politically, literally. The palace had methods for this, quiet methods. Royal blood was considered too sacred to spill publicly. So executions often happened through strangulation with silk cord, soft fabric, silent death. The empire transformed murder into ceremony. Think about what that does to a mother's mind. You hold your infant son in your arms. You kiss his forehead. And somewhere in the back of your thoughts lives a terrible understanding. One day, another prince may order his death, or your son may survive long enough to order someone else's. This was the world the harem created. Not romance, not fantasy, calculation. Every mother became trapped inside a game she could never fully escape, because now survival was no longer only about herself, it was about her child, and suddenly every relationship inside the palace changed. Other concubines were no longer merely rivals for attention. Their sons were future threats. The smiling woman sitting beside you at dinner might someday become the mother of the boy who kills yours. How do you trust someone under those conditions? You cannot. And slowly the women changed. They had to. A mother inside the harem could not afford innocence for long. She learned politics quickly, which eunuchs carried information, which servants could be bribed, which advisors influenced the Sultan's moods, which rival mothers were becoming too powerful. Every conversation became strategy, every favor mattered, even affection became dangerous, especially affection, because the Sultan's attention determined everything. If he favored your son, your future improved. If his interest faded, so could your protection. And the palace noticed everything. A prince receiving better tutors. A prince invited more frequently into important ceremonies. A prince spoken about warmly by senior officials. Each tiny detail created waves of panic among the mothers, because every advantage for one child felt like a death sentence for another. This pressure transformed the harem into something psychologically unbearable. Imagine trying to sleep at night knowing your child's future depends on forces completely outside your control. Imagine hearing footsteps outside your chambers and wondering if terrible news is coming. Imagine watching another woman's son gain influence while your own falls behind. The fear never rested. Not truly. Even joy became contaminated by it. A prince taking his first step. A prince learning to read. A prince laughing in the gardens. Beautiful moments, but every beautiful moment carried a shadow behind it. Because inside the Ottoman palace, princes did not simply grow up. They entered a silent war before they were old enough to understand it existed. And the mothers fought alongside them. Some became brilliant at it, terrifyingly brilliant. They learned how to manipulate alliances inside the harem, how to influence powerful officials indirectly, how to shape rumors without appearing responsible for them. Many European ambassadors were stunned by what they witnessed. They arrived expecting decorative women hidden behind screens. Instead, they discovered political operators, strategists, women capable of influencing imperial decisions from deep inside the palace itself. Letters moved secretly between the harem and foreign courts. Messages wrapped carefully in diplomacy and hidden intentions. The women learned how power functioned. Then they learned how to bend it. And sometimes, they became better at the game than the men around them. But mastery came at a cost. It always did. Because to survive inside the harem, a woman often had to bury pieces of herself permanently. Compassion became dangerous. Naivety became fatal. Even grief had to be controlled. Especially grief. A mother could not collapse emotionally every time another prince disappeared from the palace. Not if she intended to protect her own child. So the women adapted. Slowly. Painfully. Until some barely recognized who they had become. The palace encouraged this transformation. It rewarded emotional control, strategic thinking, ruthlessness hidden beneath elegance. The women who remained soft rarely survived long near power. And the women who did survive paid for it internally. There are records from foreign diplomats describing the atmosphere inside the harem during succession crises. Whispers everywhere. servants terrified of saying the wrong thing, doors opening at strange hours of the night, faces exhausted from sleeplessness, nobody fully relaxed because nobody knew which prince would eventually wear the crown. And once a new sultan rose, the executions sometimes began immediately. Brothers removed before sunrise, mothers sent away to distant parts of the palace, entire branches of the family erased in silence. The empire called this stability. The women living through it called it survival. But among all the mothers trapped inside this terrifying machine, one woman would eventually rise higher than any of them imagined possible. A girl taken from her homeland, renamed, reshaped, absorbed into the palace like countless others before her, except she refused to disappear. History remembers her by many names, but inside the harem she became known as Hurrem, and she understood the machine better than anyone. Before she became powerful, she was simply another frightened girl. That is important to remember. History often turns powerful people into myth. It smooths away the fear, the confusion, the humiliation. But Hurrem entered the palace the same way countless others did. Captured, transported, renamed. Nobody looked at her arrival and predicted she would one day reshape the Ottoman Empire itself. Why would they? The harem was full of forgotten girls. Hundreds of them. Most vanished into silence before history even noticed they existed. Hurrem should have been one more name lost inside those walls. Instead, she became the most dangerous woman in the palace, perhaps the most dangerous woman in the empire. She was likely born somewhere in what is now Ukraine, a small town, a priest's daughter according to some accounts. Then came the raid, fast horses, smoke, screaming, confusion, and after that, the long road south. Like so many others, she arrived in Istanbul as property. Nothing more. The palace gave her a new name, Hurrem, the joyful one. It sounded almost cruel, because there was very little joy inside the harem. But names inside the palace were not descriptions. They were expectations, and somehow, Hurrem adapted faster than most. Very fast. Too fast. The women around her noticed. So did the eunuchs. Eventually, so did the Sultan himself, Suleiman, the most powerful man in the Ottoman world. A ruler feared across Europe and the Middle East alike. Military commander, lawgiver, emperor, a man surrounded by advisors, generals, scholars, and endless luxury. And yet somehow, among all the women inside the harem, he became deeply attached to one former captive girl. Not temporarily, not casually, deeply. That changed everything, because the Ottoman system had rules. Concubines were not supposed to become true wives. Emotional attachment was considered dangerous. The dynasty preferred distance, controlled relationship, structured succession. Hurrem ignored those traditions completely, or perhaps more accurately, she survived them. She became more than a concubine, more than a favorite. She became indispensable. That was the terrifying brilliance of her rise. Many women inside the harem gained beauty. A few gained temporary attention. Hurrem gained influence, real influence. She learned quickly languages, politics, court behavior, the emotional weaknesses of powerful men. Most importantly, she learned patience. People imagine manipulation as something dramatic. It usually is not. Real power often grows quietly. Conversation by conversation. Observation by observation. Small victories piling on top of one another until suddenly the balance of power changes completely. Hurrem understood this perfectly. She wrote poetry to Suleiman. He wrote back, They discussed politics, religion, state affairs. This shocked foreign observers. The Sultan was not supposed to form this kind of attachment. Certainly not with a woman who entered the palace as a slave. But he did. And once affection mixed with politics inside the harem, the consequences spread everywhere. Other women grew afraid. Advisors grew suspicious. Rival factions inside the palace began calculating what Hurrem's rise meant for their own survival. Because power inside the Ottoman court was never isolated. If one person rose, another usually fell. And people began falling. One of the most important men in the empire was Ibrahim Pasha, Suleiman's Grand Vizier and closest companion. Powerful, intelligent, untouchable, many believe. Then suddenly, he was executed, strangled on the Sultan's orders. The palace swallowed the news in silence. No public outrage, no visible panic, only whispers. Whispers connecting Hurrem's growing influence to Ibrahim's downfall. Historians still debate her exact role. But inside the palace, perception mattered as much as truth. And the perception became clear. Hurrem was no longer merely surviving the machine. She was learning how to control it. That frightened people. It should have. Because once she secured Suleiman's trust, she began reshaping the structure of power around her. Her children gained protection. Her rivals weakened. Her position solidified further and further until something extraordinary happened. Something almost unthinkable in Ottoman tradition. Suleiman officially married her. A former concubine, a former captive, formally married to the Sultan himself. The palace had not seen anything like it in generations. The message was unmistakable. Hurrem was no longer replaceable. And from that moment forward, the atmosphere inside the harem changed completely. The women watched her constantly. How she moved, who visited her chambers, which officials treated her differently now. Because everyone understood something dangerous was happening. A woman from outside the empire was reshaping the empire from within. And she did not stop there. Hurrem became involved in diplomacy, charitable foundations, political appointments, international correspondence. Foreign ambassadors wrote about her endlessly. Some admired her intelligence, others feared it. Many openly blamed her for changes they did not understand. That often happens when women gain power inside systems built to contain them. People call them unnatural, manipulative, monstrous. Sometimes Hurrem probably was ruthless. How could she not be? The harem did not reward kindness. It rewarded survival. And survival inside that world demanded sacrifices most people never have to imagine. Every day Hurrem remained powerful, she remained trapped as well. That is the contradiction people forget. Even at the height of her influence, even when kings and ambassadors respected her, even when she shaped imperial politics, she still lived inside the same walls she entered as a captive. The same gates remained closed behind her. Power did not free her. It transformed the nature of her prison. That may be the darkest part of all, because eventually the harem changed people so deeply that many could no longer imagine life outside it. The palace became their entire universe, its fears, its rivalries, its ambitions, everything compressed into marble rooms guarded by eunuchs and silence. And Hurrem understood this better than anyone alive. She mastered the system completely. But mastery came with a terrible question. What exactly must a person bury inside themselves to survive a world like that? By the time a woman understood the harem completely, it was usually too late to escape it emotionally. That was the true genius of the system. Not chains, not walls, dependency. The palace slowly replaced the outside world until the women living inside it could barely remember who they had once been. Years passed strangely there. Outside the palace, empires shifted. Wars began. Kings died. Ships crossed oceans. Inside the harem, life moved according to rituals, morning prayers, lessons, baths, whispers, waiting, always waiting. The younger girls eventually became older women, and one day they realized something horrifying. They no longer dreamed in their native language. The transformation was complete. The empire had not merely controlled their bodies, it had reorganized their minds. The women who survived longest inside the palace developed a particular kind of awareness, hyper-awareness. They studied expressions constantly. A servant entering too quickly, a eunuch avoiding eye contact, a sudden invitation to a private dinner. Nothing was innocent anymore. Nothing, because danger inside the harem rarely announced itself openly. It approached quietly, like illness, like winter. Sometimes a woman simply vanished from influence. One week she occupied beautiful chambers near the center of the palace. The next week another concubine slept there instead. No explanation offered. None requested. Questions could attract attention. Attention could become fatal. So silence became survival. Even grief had rules inside the palace. A woman could not openly mourn for too long. Excessive emotion created weakness, and weakness attracted predators. The harem always contained predators, not monsters in the simple sense. Something more complicated. People trained by fear to prioritize survival above everything else. Women who had once arrived terrified and innocent eventually learned how to destroy rivals using nothing but information. A rumor placed carefully. A suspicion whispered at the right moment. A relationship subtly poisoned. Inside the palace, reputations died long before bodies did. And sometimes bodies followed soon after. There are historical accounts describing strange illnesses among the women. Perfectly healthy concubines collapsing after meals. Unexpected fevers. Sudden deaths during politically sensitive moments. Nobody could ever prove much with certainty. That uncertainty itself became part of the horror, because paranoia changes human beings. When you suspect danger everywhere, your mind never fully rests. You stop trusting smiles. You stop trusting kindness. Eventually, you stop trusting yourself. The palace atmosphere encouraged this mental exhaustion deliberately. An exhausted person becomes easier to control. And control was everything. The harem operated like a machine. Precise. Layered. Cold beneath its beauty. Every woman occupied a place within that structure. The asami served at the bottom. Senior concubines supervised them. Powerful mothers built networks around their sons. Eunuchs monitored movement and communication. Above everyone stood the valide sultan, managing the entire ecosystem with political precision. It was not chaos. That is important to understand. From the outside, the rivalries sound emotional and unpredictable. In reality, the system functioned with terrifying organization. Even ambition had rules, especially ambition. A woman seeking influence needed intelligence far beyond simple beauty. Beauty attracted attention, but intelligence sustained survival. The successful women learned when to speak and when silence carried greater power. They learned how to make other people feel safe while secretly gathering information from them. They learned patience, real patience, the kind that lasts years. Imagine living inside a world where one mistake could destroy not only you but your child as well. Eventually caution becomes instinct, and slowly the palace changed the women physically too. not through violence alone, through atmosphere, sleeplessness, stress, permanent vigilance. Foreign diplomats visiting the Ottoman court often described the women of the harem as composed almost beyond normal human behavior. Graceful, controlled, unreadable. Many misunderstood this as elegance. Some of it was, but much of it came from necessity. Showing too much emotion inside the palace exposed vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities invited attacks. So the women became experts at concealment. A concubine might smile politely at dinner while privately realizing her entire future was collapsing. A mother might calmly supervise servants while fearing for her son's life every second. A rival might embrace you warmly while secretly spreading rumors designed to ruin you. The emotional pressure never ended. Not completely. And yet, despite all this, human tenderness still survived in fragments. That may be the strangest part of the harem's history. Even inside systems built on fear, people still searched for connection. Friendships formed, real ones sometimes. Older women occasionally protected younger girls with genuine affection rather than strategy. Some mothers comforted children who were not their own. Some women shared stories late at night about homes they barely remembered anymore. Tiny acts of humanity survived inside the machine. Briefly, fragile, but real. Perhaps that is why the palace was so psychologically confusing. It was not pure evil. Pure evil is easier to understand. The harem contained beauty alongside cruelty, intelligence alongside paranoia, compassion beside ambition. The contradictions exhausted people. And for the women who spent their entire lives there, the palace eventually became impossible to separate from their identities. Leaving it, when that finally happened, often felt almost unreal. Some women were transferred to the old palace after the deaths of powerful sultans. They spent their remaining years there quietly, almost erased from political life. Imagine that transition. You survived decades inside the most intense environment imaginable. Every glance mattered. Every word mattered. Every alliance mattered. Then suddenly, nothing. Silence. Obscurity. History forgetting you in real time. Many women disappeared this way. Not dramatically. Not tragically in the theatrical sense. They simply faded. A lifetime compressed into forgotten rooms. And yet history remembers a handful of names. Hurrem, Nurbanu, Kozum. Women who mastered the machine so completely that they shaped the empire itself. But even their victories carried shadows, because power inside the harem always demanded payment. Sometimes the payment was innocence, sometimes trust, sometimes the ability to love without suspicion, and sometimes the payment was becoming exactly the kind of person the palace needed you to become in order to survive it. History likes simple stories. Heroes, villains, victories, defeat. The Ottoman harem does not fit neatly into any of those categories. That is why people kept turning it into fantasy for centuries. Fantasy is easier. Reality is harder to look at directly. Because the real story of the harem is not about pleasure. It is about transformation. What happens to human beings when survival becomes their entire world? The palace consumed identities slowly. Not all at once. That is important. If the horror had been immediate and obvious, perhaps more people would have resisted it mentally. But the harem worked gradually. A new name, a new language, a new religion, a new routine, then another change, then another. Until eventually the girl who arrived at the gates no longer existed in any recognizable form. And sometimes that transformation produced extraordinary people. That is the uncomfortable truth. The women who rose to power inside the harem were not weak. Far from it. Many became some of the most politically intelligent individuals of their era. They negotiated with ambassadors, influenced military appointments, directed enormous charitable foundations, corresponded with foreign rulers from behind carved wooden screens deep inside the palace. European courts often underestimated them at first. That mistake rarely lasted long. Foreign diplomats wrote home in amazement about the influence these women possessed. Because they had expected prisoners, instead they found strategists, women capable of understanding power at its deepest levels, women who survived inside one of the most psychologically demanding environments in the early modern world. But survival came with a cost that history rarely measures properly. What kind of person must you become to survive a place where trust is dangerous? What happens to your mind after decades of constant vigilance? What pieces of yourself must disappear first? The palace rewarded adaptation. A soft-hearted girl entering the harem at 16 could not remain soft forever. Not usually. Too many dangers, too many rivalries, too many moments where hesitation could destroy everything. So the women learned to harden themselves carefully. Emotion became controlled. Speech became calculated. Even kindness became strategic sometimes. The transformation was not always visible from outside. That made it more tragic. A woman could still appear graceful while internally carrying years of fear she could never safely express. Imagine living in a world where every relationship contains uncertainty, where affection might be manipulation, where loyalty might disappear overnight, where your child's future depends on political games happening behind closed doors. That pressure changes people. It has to. And yet the women endured it anyway. Some even mastered it. Hurrem survived. Nurbanu survived. Kozum survived. A handful of others carved influence out of a system designed to consume them completely. But victory inside the harem never looked clean. Never simple. Even the most successful women remained trapped inside the same structure they conquered politically. That contradiction sits at the center of the entire story. The women gained power without ever gaining true freedom. Hurrem became one of the most influential women in the empire. Still, she died inside the palace walls she entered as a captive girl. Think about that. Think about spending decades shaping the politics of empires while never fully escaping the system that first imprisoned you. The gates never truly opened. Not emotionally. Not psychologically. Perhaps that is why the harem produced such complicated figures. These women understood human behavior deeply because survival demanded it. They understood fear, ambition, manipulation, desperation. They saw people at their weakest and most dangerous, and they learned from it. Some became compassionate in strange ways. Others became ruthless. Most became both at different moments, because the harem did not allow purity. It forced contradiction into everyone living inside it. A loving mother might also participate in political schemes that endangered another woman's child. A generous patron of charities might quietly destroy rivals behind the scenes. A deeply religious woman might still operate within systems of brutality she could not control. That moral complexity is the real history people often avoid. The harem was not simply evil. It was human, compressed, intensified, locked inside beautiful walls where every emotion became sharper because there was nowhere for it to escape. And perhaps that is why the story still unsettles people centuries later. Because the palace reveals something uncomfortable about human beings. People can adapt to almost anything, even environments that slowly erase them. especially environments that reward survival. The girls who entered the harem did not begin as masterminds or political operators. Most began terrified, homesick, confused. Children, really. Then the machine reshaped them year after year. Some broke beneath the pressure. Many disappeared into obscurity. A few learned how to control the system itself. But even those victories carried scars history cannot fully record. We know the names of the women who rose high enough to influence empires. We do not know the names of most who vanished. The girls who spent entire lifetimes waiting in silence. The girls who never saw home again. The girls who died inside the palace with nobody left alive, who remembered who they had once been before the gates closed behind them. That silence may be the darkest part of all. Not merely death. Erasure. Because empires are very good at recording victories. They are less interested in recording what those victories cost ordinary people trapped inside them. The Ottoman Empire celebrated stability, succession, and power. But hidden beneath that stability were generations of women forced to transform themselves in order to survive. And survival itself became complicated. Sometimes ugly, sometimes brilliant, always expensive. That is the truth the romantic paintings never captured. Not the silk, not the fountains, not the jewels. The cost. The cost of losing your language. The cost of learning to distrust everyone around you. The cost of turning fear into strategy for so many years that eventually you no longer remember where the fear ends and where you begin. And somewhere beneath all that marble and gold, there was still the memory of a girl, 16 years old, standing before enormous gate, understanding, perhaps for the first time, that she would never truly go home again. If you enjoy dark, untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.